G'day, how are we? You, my bloody legend, are joining me for the first episode of the third project of this channel. So far, we've made a broadsword, and we've also made a side sword. But before the channel had even started, I'd done 2 projects already, and this is they. Now, in order to talk about the next project, I'm going to have to talk about these 2 swords a little bit. If that's not your cup of tea, and you just want to see the project outline and the first bit of forging, skip to this time code. And if you're a maniac who just wants to raw dog the forging by itself, skip to this one. For those who are sticking around to hear the lore, I've said it before, but the hardest part about making practical weapons is finding safe blades. Now in sunny Sydney, Australia, getting anything on the oak shot scale into the country is a royal pain in the ass. So my dreams of starting with a simple little arming sword build was out of the question. So did we give up there? Yes. Well, clearly not, because I had a wise and cunning idea. It turns out that epee blades are readily available in Australia. So instead of building a simple arming sword, I could bite off a little bit more and go with a small sword. And that's how this came about. This is what I'm calling the Mark 1 small sword. The process for making it is pretty simple. Cut down the center of it, spread the quillons out and hammer them flat, forge out the quillons and cut off the excess. All the accompanying accoutrement is incidental. The Mark 1 part is the quillon block. But just to tick boxes, we then chucked a massively oversized shell on it, threw on a grip made from a whiskey barrel, cut out a really simple pommel, and chucked a locking nut on the top. As far as the build goes, I'm pretty happy with it. It got a lot of love while I was learning small sword fencing, even though it fits a little more in the transitionary period between rapiers and small swords. To that point, the shell's a little larger than it should be, and the blade is quite a bit longer. So after the trials and tribulations of making the Mark 1, we then moved on to the Mark 2. This second sword, I really wanted to work on something that was pretty. I think that if you don't look too closely, I succeeded. The things about this one that I really like is the basic concept of the new Mark II quillon block, the new riveted brass-backed handguard. We actually have a knuckle bow now. I really like the idea of the metal inserts in the middle of the handle, and the overall proportions are much closer to an actual small sword now. However, this was an ambitious build and there is a lot wrong with it. So to get that out of the way, the part of arms are all uneven. I burnt off about 3 inches of knuckle bow material, which is why it's so stubby. And the big one's an overall lack of precision in the piece. There are gaps between the brass fittings, this piece in the middle is all wonky, and the pommel isn't even centered right. Now that brings us on to the next project. We're staying with the Mark II for this one, and we're gonna make a piece that I can be really proud of. So we're gonna fix all those problems, we're gonna make some new improvements, and with any luck, it should look a little something like this. This will be the basic blueprint for the piece we'll be working on. As you can see, aesthetically, I think a lot nicer. And I think with all the skills that I've learned over the last 2 projects, I can make something really special here. So in order to get this project underway, the first thing we're gonna need is the steel quillon frame. Alright LFG, the first thing we're gonna do is prep our bit of steel. We're gonna be using a piece of 1 by 3 centimeters steel. It's mild steel. And we're gonna use a scribe to mark out our blank. Now you might notice a little bit of dissonance between my actions on screen and the words that I'm saying. And for eagle-eyed viewers, you might see a tattoo or 2 missing on my arm. This video was one of the first I filmed alongside the broadsword video. Going back over it, I realized that the audio was boring as bat. My explanations were pretty garbage. So now that I'm a little older and wiser, I'm re-recording to give you, the viewers, a better watching experience. So let me do my thing here. Actually, it looks like I can't think of the next thing to say, so we'll have a little discussion about how this piece is going to come together. We're going to be making 6 cuts into the steel. The first is to just cut off the blank entirely. The second is going to be to cut down the center of it, which is going to allow us to draw out the quillon and the knuckle bow. The next is cutting 2 wings on the side, which will eventually become the part of arm. And the last 2 are going to be 2 cuts on either side of the top, which are going to form little shoulders on the top of the piece. The reason for that is to hopefully give us a little more give to stop a problem that was coming up earlier. Now I think I forgot to bring this up when I was filming the part talking about the problems that I had with the Mark II. One of those is while I was splitting up the quillons and the knuckle bow, I ended up pushing the tops of those pieces into the bottom of both of the part of arm. For those of you that don't know, a cold shut is when you bend a piece of steel over onto itself. During that process, the steel doesn't get hot enough to weld together and form one cohesive piece. If you manage to pull that off, what you've effectively just created is a crack. If I'm honest, on a small sword, that's not really a big issue, because I never really end up dealing with enough forces to end up breaking it. If I was to do that on a broadsword, a side sword, anything that's going to be dealing with cuts, That's a big problem. So the long and the short of it is those shoulders are to give the pas d'armes a little bit of give when you bend them up, so that there's space between them and the quillons. So that's the main thing we're going to be worried about. The way this whole production process is going to work is we'll start by bending up the pas d'armes, getting them nice and flat. When those are out of the way, we'll split the quillons and forge them out. If we still have a bit of time left over at the forge, we'll do some shaping on them, but we can always do that at home. The main thing that we're going to be concerned about is getting the basic form into shape. After all that's said and done, we'll do a little bit of cheeky cleanup on it, but one thing at a time. Let's just get focused on the forging. Right now, like I just mentioned, we are bending the pas d'armes nice and flat. The hope is that that'll keep them out of the way for the rest of the forging process, and we can get them looking all pretty and whatnot later. There we are. As you can see, we got them nice and flush with the base of the shoulders. From here on out, what we want to do is get a hot cut and split the quillons apart. I just want to say I am sorry about the filming on this video. Again, this was very early on and I didn't realize how little you'd be able to see from the position that I started filming in. I promise all the upcoming ones are going to be way better filmed. That's the quillon split to 90 degrees. I am not super happy about that extra little cut you can see in the crotch of the quillons. I think that means I've given myself a lot more filing to do later. Now while we still got a little bit of time at the forge, all we need to do now is forge out the rear quillon. I'm not going to forge it out all the way, I want to keep it nice and thick and do the rest of the work on the file later. And if I'm not mistaken right now, we're getting started on the knuckle bow. I want to pull this out all the way. I want to keep it maybe to 4 or 5 mils in diameter. That way it'll still look really good, but it'll also be nice and light for me to handle. Now, this is the bit that I was lamenting getting to. During the forging process, I think I'm putting a little bit too much torque and bend through those quillons. In order to taper out the knuckle bow and the rear quillon, I have to hold on to the other one while I'm doing it. And what I think is occurring is that while I'm doing that, I'm holding a piece of cold steel while I'm working the hot one. That's causing a lot of bending and twisting through the whole piece. And I think what's happened here is I've started to open up some metal fatigue. You can also see I missed a real nasty hammer blow right up in the guts of it there. Ever since I finished work on this thing, I've been debating whether or not to even put it in a video. But after thinking about it, I just decided that wasn't in keeping with the purpose of this channel. I'm no Alex Steele, I'm no Carl Royer, I'm just some dude giving this a crack for the first time. So I think showing the failures is just as important as showing the successes. I think as a principle, it's just good to show that for every success, there's going to be a bunch of failures as well. But even putting that aside, we learned a bunch of practical skills that are going to get implemented in the next version, which is exactly where we're going to pick up with the next video. When we're building the next one of these, what we're going to try and do is forge out the quillon and the knuckle bow at the same time. That way we're not going to risk fatiguing the steel and having to start all over again. With all that said and done, thank you so much for joining me. If you have any tips or advice on how to get this thing looking really nice, then please chuck it in the comments below. I will absolutely take anything I can get. Otherwise, if you liked it, leave a like. If you want to see more, please do subscribe. It would be lovely to have you around. I'm going to head back to the forge.